As the United States approaches its 250th anniversary, it is tempting to lean on easy, familiar history, and we tend to visualize the founding through a comfortable, unchallenging filter of yellowed parchment and tricorn hats. Take George Washington. For over 2 centuries, his likeness has been treated with an almost religious reverence. Historically, Americans have displayed his portrait in their homes much like a picture of a saint. But protecting that pristine image requires ignoring a lot of history. A flawless, unblemished version of patriotism leaves no room for the complicated reality of how the country was actually built. If we want to accurately measure America at this 250-year milestone, we have to look closely at the uncomfortable facts we usually crop out of the frame. Much of that comfortable framing comes from the mid-19th century. Artist Junius Brutus Stearns painted imagined scenes of the president's life that circulated widely, establishing a visual story of America that we still accept today. Stearns used a specific trick to elevate his subject. In paintings where Washington manages his fields, his face is rendered so bright it seems illuminated from within, acting as the immediate focal point for the entire composition. This was an intentional political choice. By portraying the plantation as a calm, orderly space revolving around a glowing, benevolent master, the art reinforced the dangerous myth that slavery was a natural and gentle institution. To make that composition work, the enslaved people forced to labor in those fields were quite literally pushed into the dark, shadowy margins of the canvas. This style of portraiture achieved 2 things at once. It canonized Washington, and it intentionally erased the humanity of the people he held in bondage, setting a flawed baseline for American history. Contemporary artist Titus Kaphar takes aim at historical erasure. At the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, he brings these conflicting narratives together. Kaphar approaches art history the same way a legislator approaches the U.S. Constitution. He amends it. He adds and changes layers to update the record without ever erasing the original document. Look closely at Stearns's 1851 painting, Washington on His Deathbed. Scan the absolute edge of the crowded room, and you'll find Washington's enslaved valet, Christopher Shields, hovering in deep shadow. His expression is practically invisible. In his companion piece, titled All That We Carry, Kaphar extracts Shields from that cramped corner and gives him the center stage. The visual transformation is striking. Instead of heavy shadows, Shields stands before an illuminated, acid-trip sky. Rough streaks of white paint crackle around his body like electricity, giving him a sense of ease and resolute humanity that the 19th century canvas denied him. Kaphar applies a similar amendment to a painting of Washington's enslaved chef, Hercules Posey. By sculpting Posey's face entirely in tar and carefully molding only his mouth, Kaphar calls direct attention to the man's uncredited, hidden labor. The very first step in correcting the historical record is turning on the lights. Kaphar pulls these figures out of the darkness and forces the viewer to acknowledge their presence and agency. But this creates a real visual problem. Once you restore light and agency to the enslaved people in the background, what logically happens to the mythic image of the Founding Fathers standing in the center? Kaphar tackles this in a piece called Shadows of Liberty. It begins with a perfectly replicated traditional portrait of Washington striking a heroic pose on horseback. Then, Kaphar violently disrupts the image. He obscures the president's pristine, pink-cheeked face under rough, shredded strips of canvas. If you read the text on those shredded strips, you will see they bear the specific names of the individuals Washington enslaved. Even the rusty nails holding the canvas in place carry specific weight. They reference Congo spiritual practices, where hammering nails into a power object signifies a binding legal contract. In Stearns's 19th century paintings, the shadows swallowed up the enslaved workers. In this modern amendment, the documented reality of slavery finally swallows up the mythic identity of the president. It is easy to view this kind of deconstruction as a pure takedown, but Kaphar's goal is to complete Washington's story, not simply erase him. In a later painting, In the Name of God, Amen, the tone shifts completely. Washington is now played against a luminous blue background, and his posture is elevated. The shredded strips of canvas return, but they aren't nailed haphazardly to hide his face. Here, Kaphar sculpts them into an elaborate, elegant ruff that actually gives the president a regal air. The historical text on these strips has changed, too. They contain the exact legal wording of Washington's will. the specific document that ordered the freedom of the people he had enslaved. By physically turning the document of manumission into a crown, the art proves that confronting harsh history doesn't inherently ruin a hero. Recognizing their most difficult choices can reveal a deeper, earned nobility. The reality of that will is heavily layered. Washington delayed the manumission, legally stipulating that the enslaved people would only be freed after the death of his wife, Martha. It was a choice born of deep reluctance. Yet, understanding the immense political and personal reluctance behind that order of events is the only way to comprehend the actual courage it took for him to make the decision at all. As the author Zadie Smith noted when describing the study of American history, true patriotism means looking at the country in the round. It is messy, complex work. As we near the 250th anniversary of the United States, taking pride in the nation requires a clear memory of its faults. We don't need flawless saints on our walls. We just need the fully amended truth.